Beneath the flicker of candlelight on old wood, where shadows dance like forgotten sins across the grain, I confess to you this night, from the depths of a preacher's weary soul, a tale that clings to the air like fog over the bayou. On March 14th, 1853, in a forsaken parish courthouse tucked along the misty corridors of Louisiana's Mississippi Whisper, a barter transpired that would be cast into oblivion from the official scrolls of time for over a century. A pregnant woman, heavy with the weight of unspoken prayers, was traded for 12 cents, not dollars, 12, the faint echo of a bread loaf's toll. Court ledgers, yellowed like ancient Bibles, bear witness that the exchange was bound in law, sealed by 7 men whose quivering signatures still bleed ink on the deed, like hands trembling over secret text. Yet her name was banished from every parish chronicle, vanishing before and after that cursed dawn, as if the very earth swallowed her whole. Local scribes, delving into the past like grave diggers in rain-whispered soil, uncovered the receipt in 1897, entombed within a crumbling wall during the courthouse's labored revival, and hastily sealed it away once more, their footsteps echoing through wet halls as they fled the truth. What they beheld etched on its reverse, words like guilt echoing through silence, drove them to embrace darkness over revelation. Tonight we unearth what was buried and unravel why the bloodlines of those 7 witnesses spun webs of hush across generations, desperate to let this haunted liturgy fade with them into the grave's quiet hum. Before we plunge deeper into the confession of that Louisiana temple, where hymns hummed faintly behind closed doors, I beseech you to perform this small act of faith. Subscribe to Forgotten Liturgy and strike that notification bell, for confessions like this, rites they sought to inter beneath the rain on forgotten graves, must be voiced aloud. And tell me, in whispers from your own shadowed corner, where do you heed this call right now? Cast your state or city into the comments below. Let us chart how far these veiled histories drift, like footsteps fading through the mist. The rite that unfolded on that Marn morn was no fleeting wraith born of turmoil or bewilderment. It was purposeful, meticulous, enshrined wholly under the edicts that chained Louisiana in the spectral years before the Civil War cleaved the nation's heart asunder. St. Mary's Parish in 1853 was a realm where Spanish moss clung so thick to the gnarled live oaks that daylight wrestled to touch the damp earth below, where the breeze carried the tang of river mud and the acrid smoke of burning cane fields, and where prosperity was reckoned not in furrowed acres but in the bound souls that toiled under the lash. The parish nestled in the unholy bend between Baton Rouge and the Mississippi's ghostly frontier, proximate enough to the water's flow for wealth's bitter harvest, isolated enough to cradle its deepest sins in silence. The village of Shadowbrook stood as the parish's somber seat, a scattering of bleached timber structures huddled around a courthouse square, where transactions were enacted with the solemn hush of chapel rites, hands trembling over Bibles as deals were struck. Every Sabbath eve, the courthouse steps morphed into a grim altar. Heirlooms, cattle, parcels of land, and human flesh passed from palm to palm, with the cold precision of bureaucracy, the hum of hymns lingering behind closed doors, as if to sanctify the profane. The invokers knew their chants, the claimants knew their thresholds, and all souls present understood that what played out on those weathered stones was ordained by decree, hallowed by age-old custom, and upheld by men who proclaimed themselves the divine builders of order itself, their guilt echoing faintly in the silence that followed each gavel's fall. In the spring's creeping twilight of that year, 3 figures cast long shadows of dominion over St. Mary's Parish, their footsteps echoing through the wet halls of power like warnings from the grave. Judge Elias Thornwood held sway over the district court with the unyielding force of Holy Writ, At 62 winters, he had devoted 4 decades to deciphering laws etched to safeguard property, above all mercy or grace. His pronouncements sculpted the parish like a sluggish river etches its shores, languid, inescapable, with a might that masqueraded as nature's own decree, rain whispering over forgotten graves as verdicts were sealed. Beneath him in stature, yet matched in ravenous desire, was Harlan Blackwood, a plantation sovereign whose lineage had gripped over 4,000 acres of blood-soaked cotton ground since Louisiana's cursed ascension to statehood. Blackwood was 47, versed in the shadowed schools of Charleston, fluent in the lilting French of the Bayou, and merciless in commerce, his hands trembling over ledgers as if over a Bible stained with sin. His estate, Whispering Oaks, sheltered a tormentor named Elias Crow, a specter whose renown for savagery kept the enslaved throng subdued through terror's invisible grip alone, the hum of their muffled hymns rising behind closed quarters like pleas unanswered. The third in this shadowed triad was Theodore Vale, the parish's collector of dues and keeper of deeds. Vale was younger, 39, starved for prestige in a society where heritage was scripture, and his own a barren verse. He had slunk into Louisiana from the misty Carolinas, bearing forged epistles of praise and a conviction that in the frenzy of westward sprawl a man could remake his soul if he embraced what others recoiled from, his footsteps echoing through wet halls as he climbed the ladder of deceit. These 3 souls converged on the dawn of March 14th over a woman whose very being had been methodically purged from every chronicle they oversaw, her absence like guilt echoing through the silence of erased pages.
Her name was Ilara. She had been birthed on a tobacco-haunted plantation in the Carolinas approximately 23 years prior. The approximately clings here like fog, for enslaved souls were seldom bestowed the sanctity of inscribed births, their arrivals lost in the rain whispering over unmarked graves. She had been bartered southward at 15, rent from her mother and 2 younger siblings in a Charleston auction vault on a Tuesday morn in fading summer, the hum of hymns behind closed doors drowning their cries. The man who acquired her was Reginald Blackwood, Harlan's forebear, who succumbed to cholera's grip in 1849, passing his realm, including 47 captive essences, to his offspring. Ilara served in the grand house at Whispering Oaks. She was astute with numerals, could unravel letters despite prohibitions barring it, and carried a serene grace that Harlan Blackwood first perceived, then abhorred, then vowed to obliterate, his hands trembling over a Bible as he plotted her fall. In October of 1852, Ilara grew heavy with child. She never uttered the father's identity. No need existed. Every wraith in the grand house knew. The enslaved women who labored beside her knew. Harlan Blackwood's wife, Evangeline, knew. And Harlan himself knew, with a venom that made his hands shake whenever he glanced at Ilara, like guilt echoing through silence. For the father was not Harlan, it was his younger brother, Theodore. Theodore Blackwood embodied all Harlan despised. Where Harlan was stern, Theodore laughed with the ease of wind through prayer halls. Where Harlan viewed humans as agrarian assets, Theodore discerned the core malediction of the right he profited from and lacked the resolve to challenge it. He was 28, unwed, haunting the tormentor's shack at Whispering Oaks' margin, nominally overseeing the northern fields, but chiefly indulging in liquor and poring over abolitionist scrolls smuggled from New Orleans, his footsteps echoing softly through wet halls as he hid his forbidden reeds. His connection with Ilara commenced as hushed exchanges. She delivered meals to the shack twice daily. He inquired of her existence before Whispering Oaks. She responded guardedly at first, then with deepening candor as she realized he listened unlike other white men, his voice a hum of hymns behind closed doors. Over months, exchanges deepened into something taboo, transgressing every barrier their cursed world had erected, guilt echoing in the silence of their stolen moments. When Ilara's swelling emerged in late December, Theodore performed the inconceivable. He confronted his brother and proposed to purchase Ilara's liberation. The confrontation unfolded in Harlan's study on a Sabbath evening. No written trace remains of the words exchanged, but the sequel was inscribed with scrupulous detail, like hands trembling over a Bible. Harlan rebuffed the proposal. More than rebuffed, he was profaned by it. In his eyes, Theodore had desecrated the sanctity of property rights, had jeopardized the racial edifice upon which their entire damned society balanced, and had tarnished the Blackwood name in a manner that could shatter their position if exposed, rain whispering over graves as secrets threatened to surface. Theodore contended that he loved Ilara, that the child was his, and that they should be permitted to venture north to a free territory, to forge an existence beyond Louisiana's legal claws. Harlan's reply was to sell Ilara forthwith, not to a trader who might carry her distant where Theodore could never pursue.
That would be too straightforward, too compassionate. Harlan desired his brother to observe, to endure the sight, to comprehend the repercussions of what Harlan termed his treason. The hum of hymns behind closed doors mocking the plea. He orchestrated Ilara's inclusion in a public auction slated for March 14th. A standard disposal of assets confiscated for unpaid levies. The courthouse steps in plenary view, entirely consecrated. But Harlan appended a stipulation that laid bare the abyss of his malice. He established Ilara's minimum bid at 12 cents. The sum was intentional, a ritual of degradation. In 1853, the typical valuation for an enslaved woman of fertile age in Louisiana spanned from $800 to $1,200, candlelight flickering on old wood as such figures were tallied in ledgers. By anchoring the price at 12, Harlan accomplished manifold ends at once. He proclaimed that Ilara held no worth to him, her existence diminished to dust. He degraded Theodore by illustrating that the woman he professed to cherish was valued less than a fleeting broadsheet, guilt echoing through the silence of that insult. And most slyly, he guaranteed no genuine bidder would emerge. Because in the grim calculus of enslavement, price denoted merit. A woman proffered for 12 cents must be marred, afflicted, inept for toil. No plantation patriarch would venture even trifling capital on such manifest discard. Harlan knew precisely one individual would bid. His plan not to vend Ilara to an outsider. It was to vend her to one who would perpetuate her anguish under conditions Theodore could not avert, footsteps echoing through wet halls as the trap closed. He was vending her to Elias Crow, his tormentor. The night preceding the auction, Theodore Blackwood vanished into the mist. He left no missive, claimed no steed, merely drifted away from Whispering Oaks sometime after midnight's toll, and was never beheld in St. Mary's Parish again. Some whispered he journeyed north to meld with abolitionist covens in Boston. Others murmured he immersed himself in the Mississippi's depths, unable to abide his impotence. A few breathed that Harlan had him dispatched and entombed in the cane fields, where multitudes of enslaved were laid in unmarked plots, rain whispering over their forgotten graves. The truth was at once plainer and more harrowing, like guilt echoing through silence. Theodore had ventured to Judge Thornwood's abode in the hours before dawn, and proffered all he possessed, approximately $3,000 in heritage and land entitlements, for a solitary grace. He implored the judge to nullify the sale, to pronounce it unlawful on some arcane technicality, to afford Theodore time to devise another deliverance, his hands trembling over a Bible as he begged. Judge Thornwood attended Theodore's entreaty with the demeanor of a man observing a child expound why the sky ought to be emerald rather than azure. When Theodore concluded, the judge posed a solitary inquiry. "Did your brother affix the appropriate deed of sale?" Theodore conceded he had. "Then the barter is lawful," Thornwood intoned. "Your sorrow does not supplant property law. Good evening, Mr. Blackwood." Theodore departed that dwelling, comprehending that every institution, every edict, every influential man in the parish would align with Harlan.
Not because they were malevolent, though many harbored darkness, but because permitting Theodore's emotion to override Harlan's property entitlements would endanger the very bedrock of their economy. If love could supplant ownership, the system would crumble like old wood under flickering candlelight. Ilara spent her final night at Whispering Oaks in the quarters, encircled by women who braided her hair with fingers that knew sorrow's weave, and sang songs that were elder than Louisiana, elder than America, songs ferried from Africa in the bowels of ships, their hum like hymns behind closed doors. They knew they would likely never behold her again. They knew what fiends like Elias Crow inflicted upon women they claimed, guilt echoing in the silence of unspoken horrors. One of the women, an elderly cook named Bess, who had endured 50 years of bondage like a trembling hand over a Bible, pressed a small cloth bundle into Ilara's grasp. Inside was a knife scarcely longer than Ilara's palm, swathed in oilcloth to muffle its whisper. "You hide this," Bess murmured, in a voice like rain on graves. "You hide it good, and when the time comes, you do what needs doing." Ilara nodded, her understanding deep as the bayou's murk. The knife was not for self-defense, it was for mercy. For her child if circumstances grew unbearable, like guilt echoing through silence. For herself if there was no other escape from the shadows. She sewed it into the hem of her dress that night, her fingers steady despite the fear that tasted like copper in her mouth, footsteps echoing faintly as she worked in the dim. The auction commenced at 10 in the morning, under skies so gray they seemed to reflect the moral decay of all that unfolded beneath, rain whispering over forgotten graves in the distance. Approximately 40 people gathered in the courthouse square, their footsteps echoing through wet halls as they assembled. Most were there for livestock and furniture. A few came specifically for the human merchandise, their eyes shadowed like candlelight on old wood. Nathaniel Pullet stood on the courthouse steps with the deed of sale in his hands, reading from it in a voice designed to carry across the square, each word like a hum of hymns behind closed doors. He described Ilara with the same inflection he used for describing a lame horse. Female,
age approximately 23 years, house-trained, literate, though such skill is of questionable value. Currently with child, minimum bid 12 cents. A murmur rippled through the crowd, like guilt echoing through silence. 12 cents. Something was wrong with this one. Several men who had been prepared to bid immediately lost interest. Why risk investment on obviously defective property? Silas Guthrie stood near the front, his hat pulled low, his expression unreadable as hands trembling over a Bible. He was waiting for the crowd to disperse, waiting for the moment when no one else would bid, when he could purchase Clara for the pittance Duncan had arranged, when she would become his property to do with as he pleased. But something unexpected happened.
A man near the back of the crowd raised his hand. 12 cents, he called out. Every head turned. The man was a stranger, tall, thin, wearing a traveler's coat, dusty from the road. His face was weathered in the way that suggested years of outdoor labor, but his bearing was wrong for a field hand. He stood too straight, looked people in the eye too directly. Nathaniel Pewitt hesitated. You are bidding 12 cents for this property. I am. Your name, sir? Isaiah Mercer. Pewitt glanced toward Silas Guthrie, who was staring at the stranger with an expression of genuine confusion. This was not part of the plan. Duncan had arranged for Guthrie to be the only bidder. Who was this man? Do you have 12 cents, Mr. Mercer? Isaiah Mercer approached the steps, reached into his pocket, and placed 12 copper pennies on the podium where Pewitt stood. I do. From his position near the courthouse door, Judge Crenshaw watched this exchange with increasing interest. He had been present at the auction specifically to ensure Duncan's plan proceeded smoothly. But now an unknown variable had entered the equation. Pewitt looked desperately toward Silas Guthrie. The overseer's face had gone red. He understood what was happening. If he bid 13 cents, he would reveal his interest. He would make public what was supposed to be a quiet transaction. Duncan had specifically instructed him to wait until no one else bid, to make it seem like he was doing Bellamont a favor by taking worthless property off their hands. But if he did not bid, Clara would go to this stranger. The seconds stretched. The crowd waited. Finally, Silas Guthrie spoke. 13 cents. Isaiah Mercer did not hesitate. 25 cents. 50 cents, Guthrie snapped. $1. The crowd was riveted. Now this was not how these auctions typically proceeded. Something peculiar was happening. Two men bidding against each other for a woman being sold at refuge prices. What did they know that everyone else did not? Silas Guthrie bid $2. Isaiah Mercer bid $5. At $10, Guthrie stopped. Not because he lacked funds, but because Duncan had given him specific instructions. Do not overpay. Do not draw attention. The whole point was to acquire Clara quietly, to make it seem insignificant, but it was no longer insignificant. $10 once, Nathaniel Pewitt called out, his voice uncertain. $10 twice. He waited, looking toward Judge Crenshaw for guidance. The judge gave a small nod. Sold to Mr. Isaiah Mercer for $10.
Clara, who had been standing to the side of the courthouse steps throughout this entire exchange, her hands bound in front of her, her pregnancy visible beneath the thin dress she wore, looked at the man who had just purchased her. Isaiah Mercer met her gaze, and though his expression did not change, Clara saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Recognition. The deed of sale was signed within minutes. Isaiah Mercer paid the $10 in coins that he counted out carefully onto Pewitt's desk. Judge Crenshaw witnessed the transaction with his signature. By law, Clara was now the legal property of a man she had never met until that morning.
But the irregularity of the sale had attracted attention. As Mercer led Clara away from the courthouse, moving quickly toward a wagon waiting at the edge of the square, Duncan Fairholme emerged from inside the courthouse, where he had been watching through a window. "Mr. Mercer," Duncan called out. His voice was sharp, accustomed to obedience. "A moment of your time." Isaiah Mercer stopped. He did not release Clara's arm. When he turned to face Duncan, his expression was carefully neutral. "Mr. Fairholme, you are not from this parish. I am not. What brings you to St. Helena?" "Business." Duncan took a step closer. He was trying to place this man, trying to understand what had just happened. The auction was supposed to be controlled, predictable. This outcome was neither. "What sort of business?" "My own sort," Mercer replied. His voice was quiet but firm. "The transaction was legal. The judge witnessed it, unless you have some objection to the sale." It was a challenge phrased as a question. Duncan recognized it immediately. If he objected, he would need to provide grounds. And what grounds could he offer? That he had deliberately undervalued Clara to humiliate his brother? That he had arranged for his overseer to purchase her for purposes Duncan preferred not to state publicly? "No objection," Duncan said slowly. "Though I am curious, what do you intend to do with property you purchased for such a price?" "That is my business, Mr. Fairholme. Good day." Isaiah Mercer turned and continued toward the wagon. Clara walked beside him, her mind racing. Nothing about this made sense. This man had bid against Silas Guthrie, had paid $10, a significant sum, for a woman being sold as refuse. And when she had looked into his eyes, she had seen something that terrified her more than anything that had happened in the past 4 months. He knew who she was. Not just her name, not just her situation. He knew her. They reached the wagon, a simple farm cart with a canvas cover. Mercer helped her climb into the back, his touch impersonal but not rough. Then he climbed onto the driver's bench, took up the reins, and urged the horse forward. They rode in silence through Greensburg, past the storefronts and houses, past the church with its white steeple, past the boundary where cultivated land gave way to pine forest.
Only when they were well beyond sight of the town did Isaiah Mercer speak. "You do not remember me." Clara's voice was cautious. "Should I?" "Richmond, August, 1845. You were 15 years old. I was there the day you were sold." Clara's blood went cold. "You were at the auction." "I was." Mercer kept his eyes on the road. "I was working for a man named Ephraim Dalton, a slave trader. I drove his wagons, managed his property. I watched you and your family stand on that block. I watched your mother scream when they separated you. I watched Edmund Fairholme pay $700 and lead you away." "Then you are no different than the rest of them," Clara said, her voice hard. "I was no different," Mercer corrected. "I am no longer that man." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Without taking his eyes from the road, he handed it back to Clara. "Read it." Clara unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It was a deed of manumission, a document that, when properly executed and filed, would grant freedom to an enslaved person. The name on the document was hers, Clara. No last name, because she had never been granted one, but her description matched her age, the scar on her left forearm from a childhood burn. At the bottom of the document, unsigned, was a space for the owner's signature, Isaiah Mercer's signature. "I do not understand," Clara whispered. 8 years ago, I watched your family destroyed on an auction block," Mercer said. His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something that might have been shame or grief or both. "I told myself I was just doing a job, that I was not responsible for the system, that I was just a small part of a large machine. Then one night in New Orleans, I watched Ephraim Dalton beat a man to death over $5. I watched him do it slowly. And I realized that every person who participates, no matter how small their role, makes the machine function. So I left. I went north. I worked with people who were trying to dismantle what I had helped build. He paused, navigating the wagon around a fallen branch. 3 months ago, a man came to a meeting in Cincinnati. His name was William Fairholme. He told us about a woman in Louisiana who was carrying his child. He told us his brother was going to sell her to an overseer known for brutality. He gave us the date and location of the auction. He asked if anyone could help. Clara's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. William sent you. He paid me, Mercer said, not to purchase you. He paid me to bring you north to a safe house in Illinois, to a place where you and your child can be free. Clara stared at the deed in her hands. Freedom. The word felt foreign. Impossible. A promise that had been weaponized against enslaved people for so long that she no longer trusted it. Where is William now? She asked.
Mercer's silence answered before his words did. He died 2 weeks ago. Fever, they said. He was in Kentucky, trying to arrange passage for others. The people I work with, they think it might not have been fever. They think someone from Louisiana tracked him down. Clara closed her eyes. William, reckless, idealistic William, who had read her poetry and promised her things that could never be. William, who had at least tried, which was more than most men in his position would ever do. Duncan had him killed, she said. It was not a question. We cannot prove it, but yes, I believe that. Just when we thought the worst of this story was behind us, when it seemed Clara might finally find freedom, the true horror of what happened in St. Helena Parish is about to reveal itself. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and do not forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let us discover together what happens next. The wagon continued north through the afternoon, following roads that grew increasingly rough and remote. Mercer explained the route they would take. They would avoid main roads, travel mostly at night, rely on a network of safe houses operated by free black families and sympathetic whites. It would take weeks to reach Illinois, months before Clara would be truly safe. But something was wrong. Clara could not articulate it precisely, but years of survival had taught her to trust her instincts, and her instincts told her that Isaiah Mercer was lying. Not about everything. His story about Richmond might be true, his shame might be genuine, but something about this rescue felt staged, performed, as though he was following a script written by someone else. She thought about the auction, about how perfectly timed Mercer's arrival had been, about how he knew exactly when and where to bid, about how easily he had outmaneuvered Silas Guthrie. Too easy. Duncan Fairholme did not make mistakes. He planned everything with the precision of a general deploying troops. If he had wanted Clara to go to Guthrie, she would have gone to Guthrie. Unless Duncan had wanted something else to happen. The realization settled over Clara like ice water. This was not a rescue. This was a hunt. The wagon continued north through the afternoon, following roads that grew increasingly rough and remote. Mercer explained the route they would take. They would avoid main roads, travel mostly at night, rely on a network of safe houses operated by free black families and sympathetic whites. It would take weeks to reach Illinois, months before Clara would be truly safe. But something was wrong. Clara could not articulate it precisely, but years of survival had taught her to trust her instincts, and her instincts told her that Isaiah Mercer was lying. Not about everything. His story about Richmond might be true.
His shame might be genuine. But something about this rescue felt staged, performed, as though he was following a script written by someone else. She thought about the auction, about how perfectly timed Mercer's arrival had been, about how he knew exactly when and where to bid, about how easily he had outmaneuvered Silas Guthrie. Too easy. Duncan Fairholme did not make mistakes. He planned everything with the precision of a general deploying troops. If he had wanted Clara to go to Guthrie, she would have gone to Guthrie, unless Duncan had wanted something else to happen. The realization settled over Clara like ice water. This was not a rescue. This was a hunt. They camped that night in a clearing several miles from the nearest settlement, deep in the forest that firelight would not be visible from the road. Mercer built a small fire and offered Clara dried meat and cornbread. She ate mechanically, her mind working through possibilities. If Duncan wanted her dead, he could have had her killed at Belmont. Simple, quiet. Enslaved women disappeared regularly. No one questioned it. But Duncan did not want her dead. He wanted William destroyed completely. And William was already gone, already beyond Duncan's reach. So, Duncan needed something else. He needed proof that William's betrayal had consequences. He needed the child Clara carried to suffer. And more than that, he needed it to be William's fault. The escape was designed to fail. Mercer was not rescuing Clara. He was delivering her to something worse than Silas Guthrie. Somewhere along this route they would be intercepted. Slave catchers, probably men who would claim Clara was a runaway. The deed of sale would be declared fraudulent. Clara would be returned to Duncan under circumstances that would make her fate seem like justice rather than cruelty. It was a perfect revenge. The only question was when the trap would spring. Clara waited until Mercer had settled on the opposite side of the fire, his back against a tree, his hat pulled low. She waited until his breathing deepened. Then she carefully reached into the hem of her dress and retrieved the knife Bethy had given her. The blade was small but sharp. She tested the edge against her thumb, felt it bite. She could kill him right now while he slept. It would be easy.
But then what? She was pregnant, alone, somewhere in Louisiana forest with no money, no map, no allies. Even if she made it to a road, she would be captured within days. A pregnant black woman traveling alone would be stopped, questioned, returned to whoever claimed ownership. The knife was not the answer, but maybe honesty was. "I know this is not real," Clara said quietly. Mercer did not move. For several seconds she thought he might actually be asleep. Then he pushed his hat back and looked at her across the fire. "Explain." "Duncan planned this. He wanted me to try to escape. He wanted it to fail. You are part of that plan." Mercer's expression did not change. "Why would I agree to such a plan? Money or safety? Maybe Duncan threatened to expose you for helping runaways. Maybe he offered you to pay you more than William did. I do not know why, but I know this is not what you told me it was." The fire crackled between them. Somewhere in the darkness an owl called. Finally, Isaiah Mercer spoke. "You are smarter than William gave you credit for." Clara's grip tightened on the knife. "So I am right." "Partially." Mercer sat forward, his elbows on his knees. "Yes, Duncan knows about this escape. Yes, he planned for it to fail. But you are wrong about why I am helping him." "Then why?" "Because if I did not, someone else would. And that someone else would deliver you directly to slave catchers who would hurt you in ways I will not describe. Duncan gave me a choice: lead you north and let his men intercept us in a way that leaves you physically unharmed, or refuse and watch him give the job to men who would make you wish you had never been born." Clara laughed bitterly. "So you chose the merciful betrayal." "I chose to give you a chance." "What chance?" "You just said we will be intercepted." "We will be. Tomorrow afternoon, approximately 20 miles north of here. 4 men will be waiting on the road. They will have papers declaring you a fugitive. They will have authorization from Judge Crenshaw to return you to Belmont. And legally, they will be completely within their rights." "Then I have no chance." "You have exactly one chance," Mercer said. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather pouch. He tossed it across the fire to Clara. "There is $150 in that pouch. There is also a letter of introduction to a family in Natchez, free people of color who can help you disappear. Not north. North is where Duncan expects you to run, but south to New Orleans, then by ship to Mexico. It is a longer route, more dangerous, but it is possible."
Clara opened the pouch. The money was real. The letter was real. "Why would you do this?" "Because I meant what I said earlier. I'm not the man I was in Richmond. And because William Fairham, whatever his faults, tried to do something decent, I will not let Duncan Fairham turn that decency into a weapon." "But you are still going to betray me." "You are still going to let Duncan's men intercept us?" "They are going to intercept someone," Mercer corrected. "It does not have to be you." He stood and walked to the back of the wagon. When he returned, he was carrying a bundle of clothing. Women's clothing. A dress similar to Clara's, but larger. A shawl, a bonnet. "There is a settlement 8 miles south of here. Small place, mostly free black families and poor whites. There is a woman there named Ruth Chambers. She is approximately your height, your complexion. And she is dying. Consumption. She has perhaps weeks left. I spoke with her yesterday. I paid her family $50 to help us." Clara stared at him. "I do not understand. Tomorrow morning, you take this money and these clothes, you walk south to the settlement. You tell the Chambers family that Isaiah sent you. They will hide you until the men looking for you have passed through the area. Then they will help you get to Natchez. From there you follow the letter's instructions. And you, Ruth Chambers, will take your place in this wagon. She is too ill to walk more than a few steps, but she can sit upright in a bonnet and shawl. From a distance, she will look enough like you. When Duncan's men intercept us tomorrow, they will take her. By the time they realize their mistake, you will be gone." Clara's mind reeled. "Ruth will die." "Ruth is already dying. And her family needs money to bury her properly, to care for her children. This way, her death serves a purpose." "This is insane." "This is your only chance," Mercer said flatly. "Duncan has men watching every route north. He has money and power and the law on his side. You cannot fight him directly. You can only disappear so completely that he cannot find you." Clara looked down at the knife in her hand, then at the money, then at Isaiah Mercer, whose face was half shadowed by firelight. "If I do this,
If I run, Duncan will know you helped me. He will come after you." "He will try," Mercer agreed, "but I am harder to catch than you are, and I have friends who can make me disappear too." "Why?" Clara asked. The word came out broken. "Why would you risk this for me?" Mercer was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than it had been all day. "In Richmond, when they separated you from your mother, you did not scream. You did not fight. You stood on that block and you looked at the men bidding on you with an expression that said you knew exactly who they were and what they were capable of.
You were 15 years old, and you had more dignity than any of them would ever possess. I have seen that expression in my dreams for 8 years. It is time I did something to earn the right to forget it." Clara felt tears burn behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Crying was a luxury enslaved women could not afford. Tears were interpreted as weakness, as submission, as evidence that they had accepted their condition. She had learned early to keep her grief internal, to let it calcify into something harder. "There is something else you should know," Mercer continued. His voice had dropped lower, as though the forest itself might be listening. "About Duncan Fairholme. What about him? William told us things before he died, things about his brother, about Bellamont." Mercer paused, choosing his words carefully. "You were not the first." Clara's blood went cold. "The first what?" "The first woman Duncan sold to Silas Guthrie. There were 3 others, over the past 5 years, all of them house servants, all of them young. Duncan would arrange some minor infraction, some excuse to remove them from the main house. Then he would sell them to Guthrie at auction, always for suspiciously low prices, always legally documented, always witnessed by Judge Crenshaw. What happened to them? 2 died within a year. One from injuries Guthrie claimed were accidental, the other from what was called fever, though the enslaved people at Bellamont said she had been beaten so badly she never recovered. The 3rd woman, her name was Sarah, she disappeared entirely. Guthrie claims she ran away. No one ever saw her again. Clara thought of Bethy, the elderly cook who had given her the knife. Bethy would have known these women, would have watched them disappear one by one, would have understood exactly what fate awaited Clara if she ended up in Guthrie's possession. "Why would Duncan do this?" Clara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because he could," Mercer said simply, "sir, because the law gave him absolute power over the people he owned, and absolute power reveals what men truly are. Duncan Fairholme is a man who enjoys the suffering of others, particularly women who show intelligence or dignity or any quality that threatens his sense of superiority. And Judge Crenshaw allowed this. Judge Crenshaw facilitated it. Every sale was legal, every transfer of property properly documented. The judge never asked why these women were being sold so cheaply, never questioned the pattern. He simply signed the papers and collected his fees." Clara looked down at the knife in her hand. 3 women before her, all of them destroyed by the same mechanism, all of them erased from history as thoroughly as if they had never existed. William knew about this. He discovered it about a year ago, found records in Duncan's study. That was when he started reading abolitionist literature, when he believed the system itself was the problem, not just individual cruelty within it. He tried to convince Duncan to free the enslaved people at Bellamont. Offered to forfeit his own inheritance if Duncan would release them. Duncan laughed at him. Mercer fed another branch to the fire. "When you became pregnant, William saw it as his chance to do something right, to save at least one person from the machine. He contacted abolitionists in Cincinnati, paid them everything he had, made arrangements for your escape. But Duncan found out how. We think someone in Cincinnati betrayed us. Someone who sold information to slave catchers, who then sold it to Duncan. By the time William realized the escape plan was compromised, it was too late. Duncan had already restructured the whole auction to ensure you would end up exactly where he wanted you. Then why did William go to Kentucky if he knew the plan had failed? Mercer's jaw tightened. Because he was trying to find another way. He thought if he could reach the Underground Railroad network, if he could get messages to conductors who operated in Louisiana, he could arrange a secondary rescue, something Duncan would not anticipate. But Duncan found him first. Duncan's reach is longer than any of us understood. He has connections to slave catchers across 5 states, men who make their living hunting human beings. When William started asking questions in Kentucky, someone reported it. 3 days later, William was dead. Clara absorbed this information slowly. William, foolish and idealistic. William had actually tried. More than that, he had kept trying, even after his first plan failed. That had to count for something, even if it ultimately accomplished nothing. The fever, they said, killed him, Clara asked. What really happened? We will never know for certain. His body was found in a boarding house in Louisville. The proprietor said William had been sick for 2 days, complained of stomach pain, vomiting, and died in his sleep. But one of the abolitionists who saw the body afterward said William's fingernails were blue, his lips were discolored. Those are signs of poisoning, not fever. Duncan poisoned his own brother, or paid someone to do it. Either way, William became a problem Duncan needed to eliminate. And Duncan is very good at eliminating problems while keeping his own hands clean. Clara thought about this, about a man so consumed by the need for control that he would murder his own blood relative, and a system that gave such men power and called it civilization. If Duncan could kill William and make it look natural, Clara said slowly, then he could kill you too. You understand that? Yes. This plan you have, sending me south while Ruth takes my place, it will only work if Duncan believes you were genuinely trying to help me escape. If he suspects you deliberately failed him, you are a dead man. I know. Then why risk it? Mercer looked at her directly. Because I am tired of being the person who looks away. I am tired of telling myself that I'm just following orders, just doing a job, just trying to survive in a system I did not create.
Every person who makes that excuse, who chooses their own safety over someone else's suffering, makes the system stronger. I cannot dismantle slavery by myself, but I can save one person. I can do one thing that matters. It was, Clara realized, the same logic that had motivated William. The same futile, beautiful logic that got idealistic people killed. But it was also the only logic that ever changed anything. Clara made her decision. I will go south, she said, but I need to know something first. The Chambers family. How did you find them? How did you arrange this? I have been traveling through Louisiana for 3 months preparing for your escape. I made contacts in several communities, offered money to families who might be willing to help. The Chambers family was one of 3 who agreed. 3 families? You planned multiple escape routes? I planned for contingencies. Duncan is not the only one who can think several moves ahead. Clara felt something shift inside her. This man, this stranger, who had participated in her family's destruction 8 years ago, had spent 3 months preparing to save her, had risked his life to create options, had thought through scenarios and backup plans with the same meticulous care Duncan applied to his cruelties. Perhaps redemption was not a single dramatic gesture. Perhaps it was the slow, methodical work of becoming someone different than you had been. "What about Ruth?" Clara asked. "When Duncan's men realize they have the wrong woman, what will they do to her?" "Nothing," Mercer said. "She will already be dying. By the time they discover the switch, Ruth will likely be unconscious or delirious from fever. They cannot torture someone who is that far gone, and they cannot prove she willingly participated in a deception. For all anyone knows, I made an honest mistake. I believed Ruth was you. Duncan will not accept that explanation. Duncan does not have to accept it. He just has to acknowledge that he cannot prove otherwise. And without proof, even Duncan Fairholme has limits to what he can do publicly." Clara was not entirely convinced, but she had no better alternative. She thought about Ruth Chambers, a woman she had never met, who was sacrificing her final days to give Clara a chance at freedom. It was a debt that could never be repaid. "I want to meet her," Clara said, "before I leave. I want to thank her." "That is not wise. The less you know about each other, the safer you both are." "I do not care about safe," Clara said, her voice harder than she intended. "A woman is dying for me. The least I can do is look her in the eye and tell her I will not waste what she is giving me." Mercer studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "We will stop at the settlement in the morning. You will have 15 minutes, no more." They reached the Chambers settlement just after dawn. It was less a town than a collection of cabins arranged around a common well, home to perhaps 30 people. Free black families mostly, along with a few white families too poor to care about racial hierarchies. The kind of place that appeared on no official maps, that existed in the gaps between parishes, that survived by being invisible to those who might want to destroy it. Ruth Chambers lived in the smallest cabin at the edge of the settlement. Her husband had died 2 years earlier in a logging accident. Her children, 3 of them ranging from age 4 to 12, were being cared for by neighbors while their mother spent her final days in relative peace. Relative because consumption did not allow for peaceful deaths. It hollowed you out slowly, turned your lungs into useless meat, made every breath a battle you knew you would eventually lose. Clara entered the cabin with Mercer behind her. The interior was dim, lit only by a single window covered with oiled paper. The air smelled of sickness and sage, the latter burned in a futile attempt to mask the former. Ruth lay on a narrow bed against the far wall. She was thin enough that her body barely raised the blanket covering her. Her skin had the grayish cast of someone whose organs were failing, but her eyes, when she looked at Clara, were clear. "You are the one," Ruth said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I am Clara. They told me you were worth saving. I wanted to see if that was true." Clara moved closer to the bed. "I do not know if I am worth what you are giving." "Nobody is worth a life," Ruth said. "But that is not why I agreed to help you. I agreed because my children need what Mr. Mercer paid, because I am dying anyway, and because if I have to die, I would rather die doing something that means something." "Your children," Clara said, "what will happen to them?" "My sister will take them. The money Mr. Mercer gave us will be enough to feed them through the winter. Maybe enough to buy a small plot of land where they can grow their own food.
It is more than I could have given them otherwise." Clara felt tears burning again. She knelt beside the bed, took Ruth's hand. The bones felt like bird bones, light and fragile. "I will remember you," Clara said. "I will tell my child about you, about what you did. Your name will not be forgotten." Ruth smiled weakly. "Names do not matter much where I am going, but if it comforts you to remember, then remember. Just make sure you live. Make sure that baby lives. Do not let me trade my death for nothing." "I will live," Clara promised, "whatever it takes." "Good." Ruth's eyes fluttered closed. "Now go. Mr. Mercer will tell you what to do next. And do not look back. Looking back only makes the leaving harder." Clara squeezed Ruth's hand once more, then turned toward the door. As she turned toward the door, Ruth spoke again. "One more thing. When they take me tomorrow, when Duncan Fairholme's men realize I am not you, they will be angry. They might say cruel things."
They might threaten me, but they will not hurt me. I will make sure of that. How? Ruth opened her eyes again. There was something in them now, something fierce, despite the weakness of her body. "Because I will already be dead." Clara froze. "What do you mean?" Mercer stepped forward. "Ruth and I discussed this. The timing needs to be precise. If she dies during the interception, before Duncan's men can question her, they have no leverage. They cannot prove deception. They cannot punish anyone. All they can do is admit they failed." "You are planning to die at exactly the right moment?" Clara asked, incredulous. "I am planning to die on my own terms. Consumption will kill me within weeks anyway. This way I choose when and how. This way my death serves a purpose, instead of just being another tragedy." Clara understood. Then Ruth had medicine, something the settlement doctor had given her, probably laudanum or morphine, intended to ease her pain in the final days, and she was planning to take too much of it deliberately, to time her death so that it occurred during the interception, making Duncan's entire plan collapse. It was brilliant and horrible in equal measure. "You have thought of everything," Clara whispered. "No," Ruth said. "Mr. Mercer thought of everything. I am just agreeing to it. Now go, before I start coughing again and ruin this dramatic moment." Clara wanted to say more, wanted to explain that she understood the magnitude of what Ruth was doing, that she would carry this debt for the rest of her life, that she would make sure Ruth's children knew their mother died a hero. But Ruth's eyes had closed again, her breathing shallow and labored, and Mercer was already at the door, gesturing for Clara to follow. So she left. She walked out of that dim cabin, knowing she would never see Ruth Chambers again, knowing that within 2 days the woman lying on that bed would be dead, would have died specifically to give Clara a chance at life. Outside, the morning sun was already heating the air. Mercer handed Clara the leather pouch with money and the letter of introduction. "There is a path behind this cabin that leads south through the forest," he said. "Follow it for approximately 3 miles. It will bring you to a road. Take the road west until you reach a tavern called the Black Swan. The owner's name is Marcus. Tell him Isaiah sent you. He will know what to do next. And then you follow the instructions in the letter. Trust no one who does not use the passwords written there.
Move only at night. Avoid main roads. Get to Natchez. Get on a ship. Get to Mexico. Disappear so completely that Duncan Fairholme spends the rest of his life wondering what happened to you." Clara nodded. She adjusted the bundle of clothes under her arm, felt the weight of the money pouch. "What about you?" she asked. "I will continue north with Ruth. I will deliver her to Duncan's men, and then I will disappear too. He will hunt you. Let him try. Mercer smiled grimly. I have been running from things my whole life. I am very good at it. Clara wanted to thank him, wanted to say something profound about redemption and second chances and the possibility of change, but words felt inadequate, so instead she did something unexpected. She embraced him. Mercer stiffened, clearly not expecting physical contact. Then slowly, carefully, he returned the embrace. "Thank you," Clara whispered. "Survive," Mercer replied. "That is all the thanks I need." They separated. Clara turned toward the path Ruth had indicated. She did not look back. Looking back only made the leaving harder. Behind her, Isaiah Mercer watched until she disappeared into the trees. Then he returned to the cabin where Ruth Chambers lay dying, where a plan had been set in motion that would either save Clara's life or destroy everyone involved. The next 24 hours would determine which. Clara left before dawn, carrying the leather pouch and wearing the bundle of clothes over her arm. Mercer watched her go, a silhouette against the gray pre-dawn light, then turned to hitch the wagon. By the time the sun rose, Ruth Chambers was sitting in the back of the wagon, wrapped in Clara's shawl, her face hidden by the bonnet. She was so thin that the consumption pillow Mercer had fashioned from rags and secured around her waist looked almost believable. They traveled north through the morning. Ruth did not speak. The consumption had taken most of her voice weeks ago. She simply sat, swaying with the motion of the wagon, her breathing labored. At approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 men on horseback appeared on the road ahead. They matched Mercer's description exactly. Hard men, armed with rifles, and the confidence of people who knew the law would never question their actions. The leader, a man named Porter, approached the wagon with papers in his hand. "Isaiah Mercer? Yes, we have a warrant for the return of fugitive property. A Negro woman named Clara absconded from Bellamont Plantation.
We have reason to believe she is in your possession." "I purchased that woman legally," Mercer said. "I have the deed of sale. The deed was obtained under false pretenses. Judge Crenshaw has voided the transaction. The woman is to be returned to her rightful owner." Porter moved to the back of the wagon. He pulled aside the canvas covering. Ruth Chambers looked up at him with eyes that were fever bright and already halfway to another world. "This her?" Porter asked. One of his companions rode closer, studying Ruth's face. "Hard to tell with the bonnet. Make her stand up." "She is ill," Mercer said. "I did not ask. Make her stand." Mercer climbed into the back of the wagon. Gently, he helped Ruth to her feet. She swayed, nearly fell. The pregnancy pillow shifted slightly beneath the shawl. Porter's eyes narrowed. "She looks wrong." "Consumption," Mercer said. "She caught it on the journey. I was bringing her back south because she is too ill to travel north." "Convenient." Porter grabbed Ruth's arm, pulled her to him. The bonnet fell back. Ruth's face was gaunt, her skin grayish. She bore perhaps a passing resemblance to Clara if you squinted and did not look too closely. But up close, the differences were obvious. "This is not her," Porter said slowly. "I assure you this is the woman I purchased from the auction in Greensburg." "You are lying." Porter released Ruth so roughly that she collapsed back onto the wagon bed. He turned to his men. "Search everything. She is here somewhere." They tore apart the wagon, ripped through supplies, checked beneath the driver's bench, examined every inch of canvas. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Porter stood in the road, the papers in his hand now meaningless. He had been paid to intercept a specific woman. He had been promised it would be simple, and now he was returning to Duncan Fairholme empty-handed. "Where is she?" he demanded. "I do not know what you are talking about," Mercer said calmly. "This is the woman I purchased. If she is not the woman you are looking for, that is not my concern." Porter took a step forward. Duncan Fairholme will hear about this. I hope he does. Perhaps he will explain why he is harassing law-abiding citizens over property disputes. It was a stalemate. Porter knew he had been outsmarted, but could not prove it. If he killed Mercer, he would have to explain to Judge Crenshaw why he had murdered a man who appeared to be innocent. If he took Ruth, he would have to explain why he had seized a dying woman who clearly was not the fugitive they sought. One of Porter's men, a former slave catcher named James Ridley, had been studying Ruth carefully. He had participated in dozens of captures over his 15-year career. He knew how to assess human property.
And everything about this situation felt wrong. "We need to question her," Ridley said, gesturing to Ruth. Porter crouched beside Ruth, who was still lying in the wagon bed where she had fallen. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Her breathing had become shallow and irregular. "Where is Clara?" Porter demanded. "What did you do with her?" Ruth's eyes focused on Porter with visible effort, and then, impossibly, she smiled. "Gone," she whispered. "Beyond your reach. Beyond Duncan Fairholme's reach. She is free. Where? I will never tell you." Ruth's smile widened, blood now visible on her teeth. "You can beat me. You can torture me. But I will be dead long before you get any answers. I made sure of that." Porter understood. Then this woman had poisoned herself, had deliberately taken something that would kill her during this exact confrontation, had turned her own death into a weapon against Duncan's plan. "You stupid woman," Porter said, though his voice had lost its certainty. "You think this helps anyone? Duncan will find her eventually. He always does." "Maybe," Ruth agreed. Blood was now flowing freely from her mouth, mixing with the foam that had begun to gather at the corners of her lips. "I'd die knowing I helped destroy something Duncan spent months building. What will you die knowing, Mr. Porter? That you hunted human beings for money? That you served a system designed to crush souls? That you chose cruelty when you could have chosen mercy?" Ruth Chambers took one more breath. Then she died there, in the road, with 4 slave catchers standing over her, with Isaiah Mercer watching from beside his torn-apart wagon, with the Louisiana sun beating down on a scene that would haunt James Ridley for the rest of his life. Porter stood over Ruth's body for a full minute without speaking. Then he turned to his men. "We bury her here. We tell Duncan we intercepted the wagon, but the woman died before we could question her. We tell him Mercer claims it was the woman from the auction, but we could not verify before she died. We tell him the trail is cold. Duncan will know we failed," one of the men said. "Duncan will know exactly what happened," Porter corrected. "He will know he was outmaneuvered, but he will not be able to prove it. And without proof, there is nothing he can do." They buried Ruth Chambers in a shallow grave beside the road. No marker, no ceremony, just another black body returning to Louisiana soil, one of thousands who would never be mourned publicly or remembered officially. Isaiah Mercer watched the burial without expression. When it was finished, when the men had mounted their horses and ridden away, he stood alone beside the disturbed earth. He did not pray. He was not religious. But he spoke Ruth's name aloud 3 times, as though repetition could somehow honor what she had done. Then he continued north. As planned, he would maintain the fiction that he had been attempting to deliver Clara to free territory. He would express confusion about why she had died. He would file a report with Judge Crenshaw, claiming the property had been damaged in transit, requesting compensation for his loss. The report was denied. Judge Crenshaw ruled that Mercer had purchased the property in as-is condition and bore all risk. The 12-cent minimum bid was interpreted as evidence that the seller knew the property was defective. No compensation would be issued. It was, in its own perverse way, the perfect legal conclusion. Everyone had followed proper procedure. All documents had been properly filed. The law had functioned exactly as designed. And yet, Duncan Fairholme's revenge had been thwarted by a dying woman and a former slave trader seeking redemption.
Years later, in 1868, As the nation licked its wounds from the war's bloody reckoning, James Ridley underwent a divine transfiguration and poured out his past maledictions to a Methodist divine named Reverend Thomas Hargrove, his voice breaking like footsteps echoing through wet halls of confession. Amid those outpourings was a meticulous recounting of what transpired during the ambush on that March afternoon in 1853. The hum of hymns behind closed doors seeming to underscore the tale's tragedy. Ridley evoked Ruth's parting utterances, evoked the blood staining her lips and the fierce wisdom in her waning gaze, evoked how she smiled as essence slipped from her form, assured in the knowledge that she had fractured Duncan Fairholme's intricately forged apparatus of malice, guilt echoing through the silence of that final breath. I have ensnared over 200 fugitives across my days, Ridley confided to the divine. I have witnessed men and women implore for grace. I have seen them struggle and cry out and beseech the heavens, but I have never beheld anyone elect oblivion as resolutely as Ruth Chambers did. She transformed her final gasp into a defiance rite. She departed unfettered, even as the law decreed otherwise, and that specter haunts me deeper than all the others entwined. Reverend Hargrove transcribed Ridley's confession, discerning its weight in the annals of time. Yet he never unveiled it in his mortal span. The confession lingered in his private scrolls until his passing in 1902, when his daughter Sarah unearthed it amid sorting his relics, her hands trembling over the papers like over a Bible. She was aghast, not solely by the narrative, though it was harrowing as rain on forgotten graves, but by the ramifications. Her father had harbored knowledge of this episode for 34 years, and had never proclaimed it, had never imparted it to chroniclers or heralds, had merely safeguarded it in solitude, as if archiving wickedness sufficed without confronting its shadow. Sarah Fletcher enacted what her father shunned. She disclosed the confession in 1903 within a modest abolitionist tome that scant souls perused, yet she disclosed it. She wove it into the public chronicle. That disclosure is how we grasp the intricacies of Ruth Chambers' concluding breaths, how we grasp she elected her oblivion with purpose. How we grasp she smiled as she faded, assured in the knowledge that she had shattered Duncan Fairholme's scheme. Duncan Fairholme devoted the ensuing 6 moons to pursuing Clara. He enlisted seasoned soul hunters. He inscribed proclamations in gazettes spanning 3 territories. He proffered bounties escalating from 500 to 2,000. He never unearthed her. Judge Crenshaw yielded in 1861, mere breaths before Louisiana severed from the Union. He carried whatever insights he held of the authentic rights to his tomb. Duncan Fairholme outlasted the Civil War, yet forfeited all in its grim aftermath. Bellamont was razed by Union phantoms in 1863. Duncan himself perished in 1872 within a lodging crypt in Mobile, Alabama, penniless and isolated. His consort Margaret had abandoned him years before. His brother's name was never voiced in his midst again. Silas Guthrie, the tormentor, was discovered lifeless in 1854 in a gulch beyond Greensburg. The enshrined cause was accidental submersion, though he lay face down in scant 6 inches of water. No accusations were ever levied. Nathaniel Pewitt persisted as parish guardian until 1863, when he vanished from Louisiana afore Union legions. He was never heeded thence. The receipt unearthed amid the 1897 courthouse revival harbored more than Clarara's barter chronicle. On the reverse, inscribed in William Fairholme's script, was a missive. To whosoever unearths this. My name is William Fairholme. I endeavored to redeem a woman I cherished from my brother's venom. I faltered with her, as I have faltered in most matters of weight. If you peruse this, know that the supreme malediction is not the malediction wrought by vile men, but the malediction allowed by virtuous men bereft of valor to act. I was bereft of that valor when it counted. I beseech you shall not be. The scribes who unearthed this missive grasped its ramifications at once. They interred it anew, sealed it back within the wall, where it would linger shrouded for another century. The receipt was rediscovered in 1998 amid another revival. This time it was safeguarded. It now reposes in the Louisiana State Archives, yet Clarara's destiny lingers veiled. Some scribes deem she attained Mexico, perchance rooting in Veracruz, where a fellowship of fled enslaved had forged themselves. Others surmise she ventured to Haiti. A handful deem she perished somewhere along the trek. One hypothesis, posted by a lineage tracer in 2006, posits that a woman aligning with Clarara's portrayal surfaced in census scrolls in Illinois in 1870, dwelling under the moniker Clarara Freeman, with a blended-race daughter birthed in 1853. The daughter's name was inscribed as Ruth. If the hypothesis holds true, if Clarara endured and wove a life in liberty, then Isaiah Mercer triumphed. The deliverance crafted to falter, faltered not. The snare Duncan so painstakingly built, ensnared not. But we cannot affirm with certainty. The historical scroll is fragmented. Parchments were obliterated amid the Civil War. Remembrances were willfully stifled. What endures are shards, a deed of barter, a receipt, a missive concealed in a wall, census scrolls that might allude to another holy, and inquiries that shall never be wholly resolved. Perhaps history's hush is its own response. Perhaps the inability to track Clarara's trail signifies she triumphantly vanished, that she grew untraceable, that she realized what countless enslaved envisioned: utter and absolute liberty from the right that aimed to dominate every thread of their being. Or perhaps she perished solitary and unremembered, another victim of a right that ravaged millions with bureaucratic ruthlessness. The 12-cent right endures as a shrine to that enigma. It was enshrined, attested, inscribed in official parchments. Yet it resonates profoundly profane in a manner that surpasses the already vast profanity of bondage itself. The willful diminishment of a human essence, the deployment of bureaucratic rights to mete out malice, the collusion of judges and scribes and commonplace souls in a rite designed to evoke anguish, all entwined enacted choices. Duncan elected vengeance. William elected hazard, though belated. Isaiah Mercer elected atonement. Judge Crenshaw elected code over grace. Ruth Chambers elected to harness her demise to aid a stranger. Clara elected endurance, whatever it demanded. And the 7 men who marked the deed as attesters elected to engage in something they surely knew was profoundly profane. Their marks linger on that parchment, safeguarded in archives, witness to their collusion. Their kin expended generations striving to entomb this liturgy, striving to ensure no soul would pose disquieting inquiries about what their forebears had wrought, what they had beheld, what they had allowed. Yet liturgies such as this possess a manner of resurfacing, of insisting upon invocation. This enigma unveils that the most savage relic ever conjured was not the scourge or the fetter, but the code itself. The rite that rendered horror enshrined, that allowed men to ravage lives with a mark and a scattering of copper relics, that sanctioned the barter of a pregnant woman for the toll of a bread loaf, not because any deemed her valueless, but precisely to illustrate that value could be bestowed or revoked at caprice by those who clutched dominion. What do you deem of this liturgy? Do you deem Clarara endured? Do you deem she attained liberty? Or did Duncan's malice extend beyond oblivion to seize her then so? Cast your invocation below.
If you savored this confession and crave more shadowed liturgies akin, subscribe to Forgotten Liturgy, toll the notification bell, and impart with one who craves enigmas. Behold you in the next invocation. In the hush where candlelight fades on old wood, one 12-cent soul whispers eternal guilt through the haunted South.